Kalinda here, and we're gonna talk about Book 1 in Philip Pullman's His Dark Materials. Book 1 being The Golden Compass. Diddle, diddle, woo. I basically just did all the movements to that like little warm-up that Sharpay and Ryan do in High School Musical.
Oh, I was definitely picturing Wayne's World. where they make the scene change thing.
Oh yeah. Well,
it's the same movement, so it worked. All right, we have read in preparation for this podcast up until page 203.
Yeah, but different page numbers. Wait, are your page numbers the same as mine?
I think they are. Chapters 1 through 11.
And like we're sorta into part 2. There are 3 parts.
Yes. Non-spoilers. I definitely, at one point in my life, I think I was in high school, I read over 100 pages of this book.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yep, just a little over 100 pages, and stopped. And I didn't understand at all what was going on. I don't know why I didn't understand, because after rereading it, it's like I totally understood the plot and what was happening. But definitely the first time I read this, I had no idea what was happening.
Well, I actually had a really hard time, like, wanting to continue. Like, I started it, the first scene is fun because, ooh, murder plot, but, oh, well, that's not a spoiler.
It's chapter 1, I guess.
Yeah, it's the opening scene, whatever. But
it's probably, something they say on the cover, maybe?
No, they don't, but it's fine. It's whatever. But the thing is that, like, after it kind of, once you start getting into page 30 or something, it's a lot of filler details that now that I'm rereading it, I'm like, yeah, these are super important.
Yeah.
But also, because you don't understand the world, it's hard to understand that he's trying to teach you the world, right? Because he's not explaining it outright. He's just kind of like throwing you into this world and you don't even know if it's like a fantasy world or not.
Yeah.
There were definitely places like locations and geography that he was trying to place Jordan College around and Oxford in general. And I was like, some of these are real places and some of these are inspired by real places. And I don't know enough to know which ones are which.
Right? There are certain words they use talking about what I'm assuming is electricity, but I can't tell if it's actually something that's related to electricity or if it's a made-up word to take the place of electricity, right? It's like, there are certain words where I'm like, is this a fantasy word or is this just a word I don't know because I don't have a great vocabulary?
Or there's like things like chocolatl that they have. When they first mentioned it, I'm like, oh, that's chocolate, obviously. And then later it's a drink, and I'm like, oh, it's hot chocolate, okay. And then later they say that it has alcohol in it, and then I'm like, okay, where are we with the chocolate?
I think that's like a real drink, though.
Is it?
Yeah.
Then maybe I'm just dumb and not worldly enough for the stuff that happens in this book.
Right? That's like, I don't know.
I mean, an alcoholic chocolate drink that's heated doesn't surprise me. Like,
yeah,
you can make that, but you consider it like a cocktail or some kind of, like a Bailey's coffee or something,
Sure.
Whereas this kind of sounded more like a colloquial drink, like hot cocoa or ginger beer or...
Yeah, there were a bunch of times where I couldn't tell if it was hyperbole or if it was real. Like ghosts. I'm like, real or hyperbole?
Okay, so the thing is that so much, especially also with the first part, because I'm rereading this, Kalinda is reading this more or less for the first time, save for the first 100 pages. I'm rereading this. The first time I read it, I was like 14, and now it's 10 years later.
Oh, God.
Reading it now, don't even go there. Reading it now, though, and having that distance from my own childhood, I realize like how much these first sections are all about defining Lyra's childhood and how much she's a young girl and how much she has a child's mind.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting too that like when I read it, when I was younger, I felt like a lot of it went over my head because I was young. But now that I'm older reading it, I'm like, wow, yeah. In my adult brain, this is totally how a child thinks. But then I'm like, Is that just me being an adult and not knowing what kids are like? Have I become that old hag that doesn't know what it is that kids like or are like? I just assume because from like this adult perspective that this is what kids are and this is how they think. But like, yeah. So I'm a little torn on that. Did that make any sense?
You mean that like as a child it didn't resonate with you, so it's actually not an accurate idea of how a child thinks?
Maybe. That was sort of how I felt the first time reading it. Where I was like, this doesn't seem like how a child thinks. But now that I'm, like in my 20s, I'm like, from my perspective, this is totally how a child thinks.
Well, I mean, it's not so much how much she thinks, but it's what you do when you're a kid. And the other thing is, like, it's set semi-historically. I mean, it's not even set in our version of reality.
Yeah.
But it is based on our version of reality, and then it's set in, like, the 30s.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
Sort of World War I, II-ish.
Yeah. 1, 2-ish. I'm thinking 2.
I don't remember history.
It was a while ago.
I was pretty sure that it was World War II was the 40s, but I wasn't sure.
Oh my god, you know what? I just realized.
What?
It's almost the 100-year anniversary of World War I.
Holy balls.
Happy New Year, everyone!
Whoa! Dark. Great.
Anyways.
But I'm really liking it so far. It does feel slow, but I do feel that maybe because I'm reading it for the second time, I'm understanding the world building better.
I think also, for me at least, like I said, that first part was slow, but then all of a sudden, there's like this moment when just zoom, I couldn't read fast enough. I was like, I forgot all this, and like, oh man, this whole thing, I didn't even realize this happened because I was young and I just glossed over it and I didn't know what it meant.
Yeah. When was that?
Which part?
Yeah, when did you get that? When did you hit that feeling?
Page number, or like we're still not in the spoiler section, so
I was just curious if it was where I sort of had that feeling, or if it was where I happened to stop the first time I read it.
Probably, actually. So anything else before we want to get into particulars?
I don't think so. I'm really enjoying it. It is a little slow. I still feel like there's a lot more that needs to happen. It's starting to pick up. This is, about the halfway point, as books do. The plot is starting to...
Yeah, it's finally coming together.
The action's gonna happen soon. So I'm gonna be real happy to read the second half of this book.
Yeah, I'm actually, like, super stoked. It was hard to stop.
Oh, yeah.
Especially because, like, we stopped just as a fierce new character was introduced, and the thing is, like, I know what's about to happen, roughly. I do forget a lot of what this series has in store.
Yeah. It was funny how many times I was reading it going like, I think I know exactly what's going to happen next. And I did. But it was because I had read it.
Oh. So you don't have any predictions?
No.
No, okay.
0. I'm not good at predicting the story. I was only good at predicting the story when I was like, oh, right, I have read this before, haven't I? So you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Obviously, go read this book. Okay?
I mean, I've already read the entire series, and as like a rough 10-year late review, an aged review, this is one of my favorite books of all time, book series, love it, everyone should read it.
Okay, solid. All right. Spoilers starting now.
Okay, so the part that I was referring to where, like, I really felt it all picked up.
Yeah.
Was when Roger is missing.
Oh, that's very early.
Because, like, Billy goes missing, and it's kind of a part of the childhood fun, but then when Roger goes missing, then it's, like, real world, it's really, and then Lyra's screaming all over the place, and she's tossing things over, and everyone's mad at her, but she's, like, not even caring, and... that was the moment to me.
The plot really did pick up there. And it's funny that, like, I didn't remember that happening at all.
I actually didn't either!
There were a few plot points I remembered. I did not remember her getting the golden compass, period. I did not remember that. But I definitely read that because I stopped just before she met John Faw. Like, how ridiculous.
Yeah, you got all the way there.
Yeah.
I feel like Mrs. Coulter picks up the pace a bit. Like, the introduction of Mrs. Coulter makes me much more interested.
Yeah, I very strongly remembered her character and that creepy ass monkey. And I knew she was going to run away because, like, I was like, I think she's going to run away. She's got it, right? And then, of course, she did. And I was like, well, it's because...
You're psychic.
I'm psychic. I remember that. But yeah, I didn't really remember her being introduced or how she got there.
See, I think the other problem is that I've watched the movie in the last year.
I don't think I've ever seen the movie.
We should watch the movie.
We should.
I don't know if I watched the movie before or after I read the books. Honestly, I'm almost afraid to say that I might have seen the movie first, but I think that that's not right because I think I read the books because the movie was happening.
Yeah.
But it's just because the casting and the costuming, the way that they all look, has really left an impression on how I imagine it. I definitely don't think that they dated everything accurately. Like, some of the costumes I think are wrong for the period that it should be taking place. They took some liberties there, but
yeah,
the style and everyone's coloring too. Like, Mrs. Coulter is supposed to have dark hair, but in the movie she's blonde. They made her blonde.
Well,
scrap that.
Lyra is blonde, so I guess that would make sense. Yeah, I don't know why. For some reason, I got it in my head the second time I was reading it. I was picturing her as black, and I was picturing the uncle as black. I think because at some point they mentioned how dark he is, and obviously it was like a dark expression, but I took that to mean dark skin or something. But I was definitely, for a long time, picturing her, black curly hair, bouncing all around, just like making a tear of the place. But then they explicitly at one point said that she had blonde hair, and I was like, okay, this fantasy casting has to stop. Because that's not right.
It's interesting that you say that, though. I mean, Asriel is a very interesting character, and it's hard to try to imagine him, and I think that's one of the reasons why the movie casting, like, solidified it for me, because I don't think I could imagine Asriel or Mrs. Coulter as physical imaginings.
Yeah. Well, and she can barely even either.
Yeah.
She makes fantasy of them all the time.
But it's just kind of like, it's hard actually them as characters, and rereading it and knowing, at least remembering some of what's to come, to try and figure out why they're doing what they're doing, and it's so confusing for both of them. They both have their own motives going on, but just that them both being Lyra's parents.
How are they ever together?
I know.
That also, like, I don't get it. Like, I can't picture it. I can't picture Miss Coulter being pregnant, even.
Oh, fair point, yeah.
Like, she had a baby. That feels wild.
Isn't that supposed to be kind of the point of, like, she's good with children? Like, she's eerily good with children. Even though everything about her does not read that way, but she must be able to put that on really well, you know?
Yeah.
But I think that understanding, like, them as parents, and understanding, like, trying to figure out why they do what they do, because to me they really are so confusing. I don't remember what more we kind of find out about them, but there's so much about how they treat Lyra, trying to figure out, like, if Mrs. Coulter picked her up from Jordan College because she wanted Lyra in her life, or how much of the attention she gave to Lyra when they were together was because she regretted not getting to know Lyra, and how much of it was genuine and how much of it was part of her play. Because both Asriel and Coulter, I remember, they both have their own objectives that are a little bit heartless, honestly.
Yeah.
Kind of like, because seeing Asriel, the first time we see Asriel, he's interacting with Lyra sternly and angrily.
Yeah.
And physically dominating.
Yeah.
And so then when you realize that she's actually his daughter, I was reading that whole scene knowing that he was her father and being like, wow, he's such a shit dad. What kind of dad is this?
Yeah, no, it's weird. But then, like, thinking about, like, her coming in all dressed up nicely to talk to him and give him updates on what's going on. There was something about that, like, those interactions, at least, like, one of the ones that we see in a flashback. Like, that one made sense. There was something about that that was like, cold, fatherly sort of.
It was cold.
Yeah. But it was still, and being like, you haven't even gone underground yet. It's like, there's a whole world down there.
Yeah, no, I think that, because that's what I'm talking about. It's not like they're completely uncaring of her, but it's strange to see how much, like, I feel like Asriel's involvement with her is mainly motivated by pride. Like, when they tell the story of, like, how, he protected his house and killed Mr. Coulter.
Yeah.
That, for me, like, his kind of protective presence over Lyra in that moment had more to do with Asriel asserting himself as the lord of his house, and no man was going to take his own away from him. And that could just be because of what I expect to come, rather than what's actually been told. But just keeping that in mind and questioning how Asriel and Coulter both have treated Lyra.
Yeah, some of it feels like an era difference.
Yeah, that too. Especially because Asriel's a lord. And I kind of, even if he had a married life and had children, like not Lyra, somebody else, anywhere at all, right? That he would have been a fatherly figure, but he would have been a distant one anyways.
Yeah.
He would have cared, but from afar.
Well, and then if even the two of them were together, I'm not sure how much Miss Coulter then, either as a mother, would really be around either.
Yeah, same.
Much of the upbringing would probably have been left to
nurses.
Yeah.
But it is interesting because you're right about some of these moments of camaraderie between Asriel and Lyra, that, like, this kind of deviousness in Lyra speaks to Asriel. He recognizes a kind of...
Can I see the head? He laughs. Rather than being, like, looking at her like, what is wrong with you? It's like, she's like, no, I want to see the head. He's like, don't be gross. Oh, that was great too.
Yeah.
It does feel like, at one point, Pet, is that the nickname for her daemon?
No, Pan.
Pan, sorry. Because I can never remember the long form of it.
Pantalaimon is how you pronounce it.
That's good to know. There's a lot of things I don't know how to pronounce.
Yeah, I was reading this and thinking that might be a thing. I listened to the audiobook and obviously then the movie, so you can hear everyone's names the way
yeah.
they pronounce it. But the other thing is that some of the Egyptian names, if I tried to say them without an English accent of some sort...
Oh, that would sound wrong.
Yeah, it sounds wrong.
Yeah. Oh, but Pan.
Yeah.
Pan makes a comment about how she's making a pet of you. And it's like, that was so true. It did feel like Miss Coulter wasn't looking at Lyra and seeing Lyra so much as she was looking and seeing, like, her daughter that she was going to
parade around
and turn into, like, well, you're my daughter, so therefore you do this and are this because it's, there's this kind of relationship and you're a woman and you're, like, have royal blood or whatever, there's...
Except that there's no royal blood involved, by the way.
Yeah. But, you're...
This prestige, this class.
Yeah, you're a higher class than, those people. There's that whole idea. And it feels like Asriel sort of, I don't know, is more willing to, like, talk to Lyra and know that she has, like, her own life that he's not always a part of. I don't know. But I also know nothing about what's going to happen. And they really play with you on who you can trust.
Yes.
What is any of this? Because, the first thing you see is the guy, he's trying to kill Lord Asriel, but you also know that he has good intentions behind all of it. But, like, he also tried to kill him, but you're like, okay, but he cares about Lyra and, like, gave her the golden compass, gave her the alethiometer. Is that sort of how you say it?
Alethiometer, yeah.
Okay. Gives her this thing, wants to protect her, but also knows she has to make her own decisions because #prophecy or whatever. But yeah, it's like, how do you know who to trust? And I keep thinking too, she's going to be betrayed. But they say, like, chapter 1, that she's gonna betray. And I'm like, who the fuck is she gonna betray? What's happening? Who? Huh?
Okay.
I'm like, who? Who is it?
It's hilarious because I know what these prophecies are all about, and I think you're thinking too short term, maybe not short term, but narrow scope.
Yeah.
The thing is that this book, you introduce to so many people, right? Like, so many people are on board. We just got Yurik Bernison.
Was that how you say that?
Yeah. And we just got Lee Scoresby is his name, right? Like, they just appeared out of nowhere. And I was like, I forgot how we met them.
Oh, right.
And then there's the whole team of Egyptians who are on board with this. But the thing is, like, this is just the beginning. There are so many places she goes, so many people she meets.
Who's she gonna betray? And I'm like, are you kidding? It's not gonna be revealed in this book. That's gonna be like book 3, okay? That's gonna be like where this is all leading, right? This isn't gonna be like that's not book 1 material. And so I'm like, I have to remind myself to just like stop thinking about it. Like, shut up. Stop it.
I feel like I remember telling you a little bit about what the premise of his Dark Materials is.
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
I know you talked about a girl and a guy, because the subtle knife, someone else has the knife. Because she has the golden compass, someone else has the subtle knife. But I don't remember, who he is or how they meet. Or if I do, it's spoilers.
It's like, okay, so I guess I don't want to spoil that then. But it's kind of like when you're reading Harry Potter.
Sure.
And you realize it's a metaphor for Jesus. Or something like that. Or you watch Star Wars and you're like, this is a metaphor for Nazi Germany. Something like that.
Okay, sure, yeah.
So when you're reading his Dark Materials, it's a metaphor for, like, it's not like a metaphor, it's like a literal allegory. They're not even hiding it once you get to the end. But it's like one of those classic tales that, scholars have written about. Lore and myth all around it.
I know, it definitely, at some points, certain characters remind me of different things in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in that series.
The Narnia?
Chronicles of
Narnia.
Yeah, Chronicles of Narnia. Duh. But anyway, continue.
But my point is that I went downstairs and I told my mom that I was reading it, and she said something about Lyra. She was like, oh, I don't really remember. She has read this book, the whole series. And she was like, oh, I remember them saying something about Lyra being like the second coming or something. And I was like, yeah, she literally is the second coming. The whole point is that it's a retelling of blank story. And she was like, oh, because she forgot. And it's like, that's the whole point of the story. And I was like, you grew up Catholic, Ma. How did you miss that biblical reference? All right, so now I've narrowed down what kind of story this is going to be.
Biblical.
Yeah.
I mean, Narnia is super biblical, so
exactly.
That's probably why.
England. It takes place in England, so...
I keep thinking of the Ice Queen offering the treacle tart.
Well, it wasn't treacle tart. It was Turkish Delight.
Whatever.
Sorry.
You're right.
It's just because I remember that distinctly because it's pretty much the only thing I remember from when I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in school, because we brought in Turkish Delight and ate it. And I was like, this isn't that good.
It's cool. It's pretty good. It's pretty dope.
It's alright. I mean, if you're in war-torn England during the Blitz and sugar is rationed, it's aight. But
I mean, it's sugar, so yeah. That character definitely reminds me of that, because it's that same, like, good with children though you wouldn't expect them to be, right?
Yeah, fair.
Where it's like, the whole time I'm like, it's a trap. It's a trap! Run! They're wearing furs! They're offering warm things when it's cold! That's as far as my brain makes analogies. Okay, that's as close as I get to, like, finding links between stories.
It's fine. You know that when I read Jane Eyre, I constantly compared it to Harry Potter.
Wait, why?
Because he's an orphan boy.
Oh, wow. Well, before you said Harry Potter, I was going to say Annie, because she's an orphan girl.
Yeah, I mean, well, okay, there's lots of comparisons, okay?
I believe you.
Yeah. I'm also rereading this. I'm like, holy crap. I knew it was this biblical retelling, but actually having studied this shit, it's so obvious. Like, if you had taken my English classes, you would know exactly which biblical retelling this is.
And I would know what was going to happen. I would be having prophetic knowledge out the wazoo.
That's another thing. Okay, so here are my 2 bullet point notes that we haven't even talked about because we're so chatty. Because I was also going to talk about how, you know how the point of it being slow at the beginning is not just exposition, it's not just him trying to tell you about this world, he's trying to tell you about Lyra's world, but also kind of, I think, setting up the stage for when your pretend playtime becomes reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lyra's been playing at war with the other college children, the other townies, and then when the Egyptian children come in, like, and how those allegiances kind of change and flow with whoever the biggest threat is, and the kind of pranks that they play with each other. And I actually quite loved that moment where she asks Egyptian boy about what's going on because Billy's gone missing. And then that boy yells to his friends, hey, she doesn't know what's going on, because he's basically saying that she's an idiot. And then she throws down her cigarette because she can recognize the cues for a fight.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great line. Like, that was a great little moment.
Yeah. And
it kind of sets the stage for her saying that she's going to battle, or that she plays at warfare, and that is exactly what's about to happen when the Egyptians storm the north to try and get the kids back. And how allegiances are shifted or made based on circumstances, as with this discussion with the witch's demon, how that witch's demon is talking about how not all the witches agree, there are different clans, and then different particular people among the Egyptians being like, well, are we expected to deal with such and such? And the leader being like, yes. But it also shows what kind of person Lyra is, as being this kind of feisty, tough girl, fierce girl.
Yeah.
And it is true how we were talking about how Azriel has these moments of, there's kind of like a shared spirit there, where Lyra is definitely going to be the person who fights versus Mrs. Coulter, who's someone who's calculating, steps back, tries to see how she can manipulate situations to her advantage.
Yep.
What do you think of the demons?
I think they're really interesting.
Wow.
What?
They're so interesting you don't have anything to say about them. It's fine.
Well, I mean, it's more like the way that fantasy interacts with this story I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, daemons is one thing. So, in my head, you know, when it first starts out, it's like, okay, everybody's got daemons. Everything else is normal. That's what my brain goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
My brain's like, all right, alternate world where everybody has daemons. Cool. But then night ghasts show up.
Okay.
And I'm like, okay, so that's just a nightmare?
I'm just going to tell you, those are not a thing. That was basically like a nightmare.
Yeah, but she's like, but you saw it too.
To her own demon.
Yeah. But do they share dreams or something?
Yeah, they share dreams.
Oh, I didn't know.
Well, it said, the only reason I know that, and I'm not saying, oh, I'm not sure, is because it explicitly said that just off the cuff at one point, and I remember being like, oh, didn't realize. Cool, thanks.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't realize. Cool, thanks. So like that. But he also says, you know, that he can see spirits in things. And, you know, there are the little spirit in the mechanical beetle, right? Like the scarab, sort of. I'm in my head, I imagine scarab.
Yeah, it's pretty much like that.
Right? And so, like, because there's the spirits, but then there's literally a bear that talks, right? And there are witches. And I'm like, okay, wait. So this isn't just like a normal world, but everybody has demons. There's like other stuff. And I'm like, okay, so how far does it go? Like, how much? I don't know how to say the name of the armored bear.
Uric Branison.
No, not the one specific one. Panzerbjorns.
Panzerbjorns.
Panzerbjorns. Yeah. I was like, okay, so an old wives' tale?
No.
And then I was like, no, but there's a bear on the cover, babe. And I'm like, okay, so, so that's gotta be real.
I mean, the thing is, so, like, what I find interesting is because I think I'm already gonna tell you something about the subtle knife. But, well, I told it to you before when I was telling you the general stuff.
Okay.
And they've already referenced the other worlds, right?
Yeah.
So the point is, though, that Lyra exists in one world, and the wielder of the subtle knife, who we will meet in the second book, right?
Exists in another.
Exists in another. He exists in more or less our understanding of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So when we see him, he doesn't have a demon. He doesn't live in a world where people have demons or with talking bears, right?
Yeah.
So that's just kind of something to notice how technology or how science and how the church has made sense of the world in which one's soul exists outside of their body. Like, how has that affected that world's understanding of its environment?
Yeah.
Because the thing about the alethiometer is that people, they made it and they didn't know what it was doing. They thought it was doing something with the constellation, but they didn't know what it was really doing. But it was reacting to something, but they didn't even know what yet.
Yeah.
And the fact that they could make something like an alethiometer makes sense in that world, but they couldn't really do it in our version of the world.
Sure.
Because of the consciousness of a soul. Because it's outside of their body, it's a companion as an animal form.
I don't think I really thought of it as a soul that existed outside of their body. I don't think I'd really thought of it that way.
Well, that is what it is. It's their soul. I thought that was obvious. No, not just obvious. I thought that it was explicitly stated.
Oh, I don't think so. At least I don't recall it. But that doesn't mean it wasn't stated.
Oops. I'm not sure if it was. I don't recall either.
Halfway point spoiler.
But I think the thing is that maybe the book didn't say it, but the people in the world know that.
Sure.
In Lyra's world, they know that it's their soul.
Yeah. There's been studies that have shown that you enjoy things better with a spoiler.
Ooh, interesting.
When the ending is spoiled, apparently the enjoyment goes up, and I think it's just because you're like, ooh, I can see where all the lines connect and how they connect. You know, it makes you feel like a mastermind.
What actually I've noticed is that I will often enjoy, like, if there's a movie and a book, the average of my enjoyment of both will be higher if I watch the movie first.
Interesting.
Like, that's not necessarily to say that I wouldn't necessarily like it if I read the book better. Like, oh, fuck, what am I saying? If I read the book better. No, I mean that, like, when I read the book first, I may like the book, and then I see the movie, and of course the movie is just blah. But if I see the movie first, I usually definitely enjoy the movie, at least. Even if I don't love it or whatever, I enjoy it. And then when I read the book, I know sort of what's going on, but I like getting all the gaps filled, and I notice more clearly what's different from the movie. Like, the deviations stand out more when I'm reading than when I'm comparing a movie after reading the book.
And the interesting thing, too, because I know what you mean, noticing, you know, the deviations, for some reason, they feel more like choices. It's like once you notice the deviations, you notice how they adapted it to film, rather than, at least for me, whenever I watch a movie after I read the book, I'm like, oh, they left it out, or like, oh, they changed this, right? Not really thinking so much about how, like, they changed it because of format or, like, adapting it, you know, for the screen. I don't know why. I can normally understand and appreciate it more when I've gone from movie to book than from book to movie.
Yeah. And, I mean, everyone who's always like, the book is always better than the movie, is because you're putting books on pedestals. And sometimes you just like books as a format better.
Yeah.
And it can depend on the story as well. Some stories are better on paper than they are on screen.
Well, and it feels like the canon version, right? If the book came first, it somehow feels like it's the right one.
Yeah, it's the true one.
Yeah, well, and then whenever I know that I'm going to be seeing a movie of it after reading the book, I've started adapting it in my own head of how I would want to see it on screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's not, what I would expect.
Yeah. I feel like that sets it up for disappointment. It's way easier to cool your mind into seeing the movie first and then reading the book.
Yeah.
Then everything's less personal.
Yeah. The problem is I still really like reading the book before seeing the movie.
I know, same.
Some part of me still does it. But I do try to allow myself enough time between reading and watching. I don't try to do them back to back because I know then I'll definitely be disappointed. But like, I'll try to read it and then honestly I might even like wait a year and then watch the movie because I feel like I'll have absorbed the story rather than like remembering it too vividly. It's so dumb. It would be so much easier to just watch the movie and read the book.
Well, I mean, the thing is that the movie of the Golden Compass is kind of
bad.
It's just not as like filled in, obviously. I mean, they always skim back, but I just mean that like even just the world doesn't feel as integrated. And I mean, they don't have a sequel. There's just the first movie. And I think they anticipated that they weren't going to get to make a sequel. So they left it kind of enclosed in this world. And part of what makes this series so good is knowing about this outside part of it, the other worlds. Well, because they kind of explain all of your questions in Lyra's world.
Mm-hmm.
Not all of them. I mean, that's a broad statement. But it kind of puts perspective on it all.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes the series better. Well, good, right? But also talking about, like, the demons.
Mm-hmm.
So, because also in this first bullet point even, is how certain things have been set up in the first part of this book. That, like, yeah, they introduced this warfare, this childhood of Lyra's, and her doing pranks on the boat.
Mm-hmm.
But also those night gas and going into the tombs and basically the kind of moral repercussions or guilt that follows disrespecting the human and demon relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And switching up the coins of a skull and its demon and how that affects Lyra and how it upsets her and makes her feel really bad and scared, like, just shows what that relationship means to these people.
Oh, yeah.
And also, understanding, like reading this, thinking of Pantalaimon as just explicitly her soul.
Sure.
It's not quite that simple, because Pantalaimon has his own personality.
Yeah.
His own attitude towards things. And trying to, like, meld those two things together and recognize that they are both one, but also not.
Yeah. I definitely felt that connection moment too. When Pantalaimon started pulling,
Mm-hmm.
isn't that what they called it? Yeah, when he started getting further away, and she was like, she just really couldn't.
Yeah, and what I'm finding interesting is, like, when I was 14, I was like, oh, they're their souls, whatever. We can make this, like, a direct metaphor, and that it really doesn't work that way. I'm trying to imagine, like, our world's version of pulling, right?
Yeah.
Like, what would that be? It doesn't exist. It's not a direct comparison.
Yeah.
And the demons are, like, really important to the story. And everything that happens further on, and trying to think of those things as being, like, things that I can actually directly place in my world, and realizing I can't. When I was 14, I thought I could, but now I'm like, no, it's not the same.
Yeah. Hashtag subtlety.
Yeah. And then also the fact that, like, more or less most people's demons are of the opposite gender.
Yeah. And that it's, like, rare to be the same.
Yeah. Again, like, I'm trying to be like, well, what is this in my world? And it's like, no, it's not that simple. It's not a verbatim translation of this world. Chill. But it is interesting to think of, like, Mrs. Coulter as that monkey.
Ugh.
It is strange to me, especially with you saying, like, you can't imagine Mrs. Coulter pregnant, you can't imagine Mrs. Coulter and Lord Asriel in love, and whenever I think of the monkey, I agree. Like,
oh, yeah.
that monkey.
No.
And that being Mrs. Coulter, it does doesn't fit with Asriel at all.
No. I think the thing, like, about her is that I wonder how much of an act she ever has to actually put on, and how much of it is really just her. How much of it is really just that she can believe both of these things at the same time. That she can believe that she is doing the best, and that everything is the way that it should be, and that she is in charge. And, like, I think that's just her. I can't imagine, like, I think that in some ways she thinks she's doing the right thing. Cause, like, I think she's completely honest when she's writing those beautiful letters for those kids. She is like, I am doing this for them. Like, I feel like she really must believe it, and then just throws them away because she's like, no, it did what it had to do. Mm-hmm. Like, this isn't for the parents.
It was for the children.
It was for the children, right? Like, but it's that sort of mentality that makes her so manipulative, is because she is, like, so 100% like believing all of this, and what can make that monkey snap. And, like,
well, I think because the other thing is that it's again something where we're getting it from Lyra's perspective, so it's like a child's perspective of not understanding all the politics of this world and not understanding the ramifications. It's like when she's with the other kids and she knows that she's somehow more important than the servant children, but she doesn't get it.
Yeah.
And so, like, when she's with Mrs. Coulter and she's at these parties and she's overhearing these adults talk about these things, that we don't get to see the full picture of what's going on because Lyra hasn't had it spelled out to her how the whole system works. But the whole talk of the landloper police being on the Gobbler's side, right? And the Gobblers being the General Oblation Board. But the point is that this is in a world where it hasn't been explicitly said yet, I don't think, but we're going to get to the point where Mrs. Coulter, she married a politician. She is in politics. She works for the church.
Yeah.
The church is the government.
Yeah.
This is not in a form of England in which there's religious freedom. Yeah. So a lot of all of their concerns and their interest in dust is religious.
Well, because religion and science also heavily overlap.
Yeah. Because all of they're talking about these elementary particles, these Rusakov particles, or whatever the hell.
And that's all totally related to religion.
Yeah, because there was this part, which I don't think I saved, but I'm going to look for it.
It's like, there are other worlds? Sure, there are other worlds. Heaven and hell. It's like, what about the others? What others? You're right.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because, like, that whole idea of there being another plane of existence all around us.
Quantum physics.
Well, I'm thinking of Jane Eyre because it's time. Because there is a character in Jane Eyre named Helen Burns, and she is devout, and she's the one who teaches Jane piety, basically, but about God and about, like, this whole invisible world all around her, and it's the kingdom of heaven. And so that's religious, and it's a notion that doesn't just exist in Jane Eyre, obviously. And in here it's there, but then it's also kind of running into this idea of multiple universes and worlds. But there was this one, like, flurry of conversational snippets she caught at one of these parties with Mrs. Coulter.
Yeah, I thought it was super interesting rereading that and, like, reading all those conversations, because I know I didn't catch any of them the first time, right? But, like, this second time being like, ooh, I'm getting it now.
Yeah, it's just before she runs away, but the thing is, like, she's hearing a lot of stuff and she's talking to a lot of people, but then there's this part where it's just a hodgepodge of different things. So in this excerpt, I'm going to read it. The last experiments have confirmed what I always believed, that dust is an emanation from the dark principle itself, and do I detect the Zoroastrian heresy? What used to be a heresy? And if we could isolate the dark principle, Svalbard, you say? Armored bears? The oblation board? The children don't suffer, I'm sure of it. Lord Asriel imprisoned? Lyra had heard enough.
Yeah.
And that didn't come out because I can't do a lot of different voices, but that was a lot of different voices.
Yeah.
And the thing is that, like, now that I know what's to come, and the idea of dust being this religious issue, I've never heard of the Zoroastrian heresy. But the fact that they have a name for it, and then they say it used to be heresy, but it's not anymore. And the thing is, like, it actually makes total sense, because what we're going to find out is happening to these children is something that, in one aspect, the church should be against. But then, on the other hand, knowing more about dust, then they say that it's in the name of the church that this is what we want to happen, that this is better for everyone.
Sure. Yeah.
And I don't know what Zoroastrian means. I don't know what Rusakov is all about. I don't know if those are referencing specific people or things that actually exist in our world, or if their Greek names mean anything that I'm supposed to know just because of that. But
the dark principle itself, his dark materials. I am seeing the connections. I know nothing.
So when you were saying that you were like, is that electricity or is it a fantasy thing? Were you talking about dust?
No. It starts with an A. What is it that they don't say electricity? They say al something or other.
Oh, that's probably electricity.
Ablation or something, right? I was like, is that something that has to do with electricity, or is that just instead of electricity? Because it basically sounds like exactly like electricity, but I don't know why it's not called electricity. I don't know why it's called something else.
I didn't pick up on that at all. Not oblation, though, right?
No. It starts with an A. I don't remember.
I don't either. Anyways.
Yeah, they frickin' smoke poppy.
Oh, yeah. But I mean, it's not just poppy alone. It's clearly some kind of...
poppy and something, but...
Well, I just realized that my second bullet point was something we already talked about. So that's all me for bullet points.
Cool.
That I actually wrote down. Oh, guess what?
What?
I'm not gonna hide to you what story this is redoing, because...
Okay, great.
It's the first frickin' quote in the book.
Great. Tell me.
Into this wild abyss, the womb of nature and perhaps her grave, or neither sea, nor shore, nor air, nor fire, but all these in their pregnant causes mixed confusedly, and which thus must ever fight, unless the Almighty Maker them ordain his dark materials to create more worlds. Into this wild abyss the wary fiend stood on the brink of hell and looked awhile, pondering his voyage.
Paradise Lost.
And the wary fiend is Lucifer. And I actually... because I thought you were going to remember that was the story that was being retold. And I pulled out my Norton anthology.
Oh my god.
Because, like I said...
Okay, we're true nerds here, okay? We got a Norton anthology, okay?
Check me out. It's just one volume of many.
It's true. There are too many.
But even if you missed that quote... and you had read Paradise Lost before, there's a specific line that when it came, I was like, oh shit, they're not even being subtle. It's when Dr. Lancelius, is that his name or whatever, is talking to Father Coram, and says, without this child we shall all die, so the witches say, but she must fulfill this destiny in ignorance of what she is doing, because only in her ignorance can we be saved. Do you understand that, Father Coram? No, said Father Coram, I'm unable to say that I do. What it means is that she must be free to make mistakes. We must hope that she does not, but we can't guide her. I am glad to have seen this child before I die. And her ignorance, the need to allow her to exercise free will, is so, prevalent in Paradise Lost.
Interesting.
Are you familiar with Paradise Lost?
No.
Okay.
Do you want to tell me?
I mean, it depends on which book you're at, but it's talking about Lucifer's fall from grace and his debatable coercion of Adam and Eve to eat from the Tree of Knowledge.
Okay.
Paradise Lost is a minefield. I didn't even read it in school. I just listened to lectures, and I was like, what the hell is this confusing crap? Mostly because of all this talk of free will. I mean, that's what the whole thing is about, is what really is free will without knowledge,
Mm.
and so on. I mean, his Dark Materials doesn't, I think, get into that so much. It's not so much about those philosophical questions, those theologic questions. It's about other issues with theology and concepts of growing up, basically.
I'm not gonna find it. I don't know why I keep looking.
I'm not going to find the line from Paradise Lost that I want to say because Paradise Lost is too long. I wrote an essay on Paradise Lost.
Wow, you never read it.
I never read it. I never read Paradise Lost, but I wrote an essay on it. That's pretty much true of all my college essays. Not even a joke.
Not gonna lie.
Oh, I found it because I have a highlighter. So the quote that I felt was being directly referenced in The Golden Compass when Dr. Linsalius said that is, "For man will hearken to his glozing lies and easily transgress the sole command, sole pledge of his obedience. So will fall he and his faithless progeny, whose fault? Whose but his own? Ingrate, he had of me all he could have. I made him just and right, sufficient to have stood, though free to fall. Such I created all the ethereal powers and spirits, both them who stood and them who failed." The free to fall line is particularly what I felt was being paraphrased by saying that she must have the freedom to make mistakes.
Ah.
I mean, I'm nerding out right now. Like, this is super exciting to me.
I'm excited to finish.
Me too.
All right, thank you for listening to the podcast. I'm Kalinda.
I'm Ivy.
And that was part 1. Come back for part 2, where we read chapters 12 to whatever the end of the book is.